Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was created by Jose, who's a beginning photographer from Spain. Camera was a Canon 30D, lens effectively about 20 millimeters, exposure trio, ISO 100 f8 in 1.3 seconds. Paraphrase backstory is that Jose loves to shoot scenes with just a few elements, really loves to shoot beach and desert landscapes, and this is a beach near his hometown. Under questions and comments, Jose said, would I comment about square framing, square cropping? When do I recommend it? What do I think about it? We'll get into that in just a few minutes. A lot of things I like about Jose's image. He definitely has, to my way of thinking, chosen a scene here that does just have a few elements. To me, they're just a few subjects. The grasses, really important, very highly emphasized subject. Then you have a pretty simple space of the dunes and very simple idea here on the surface of the dunes. Texture that's repeating and simple pattern, and then the sky. And then going to monochrome. Big simplifying effect on the image. To my way of thinking, color is one of the most important and definitely the most complex of all the design elements. When we get rid of color, we can really simplify in all kinds of ways. Another thing that I enjoy about Jose's image is that even though it's very simple, I still get a very powerful sense of being moved around in a dynamic way in this image. So I want to talk about the design element of contouring line. Also talk about something that is really sort of a part of the idea of line, and that's implied line, and how the line in this image is helping to move us around in a dynamic way, even though the image is really simple. Two of the main subjects, these grasses, they're sort of a mirror reflection of each other. They are connected by a diagonal line, and diagonals are very dynamic. We'd much rather move on a diagonal than we would straight up and down or straight across. We're much more drawn to diagonal movement or curving or arcing movement. So this is a very powerful arrangement or subject choice. The fact that there's a progression here that's exciting from large to small also really makes the movement here dynamic. And then at least on the diagonal from left to bottom right, there's a lot of other movement of either contouring line or implication of line that is adding to that energy. Contouring line where the dune meets the sky starts high on the left and moves down to the right. That breaks the parallel. Potential for parallel on the x-axis or y-axis. It breaks that in a real slight way, but it still breaks it, so that's dynamic. And then you have the pattern, the sand. It's all implied if you add it up to move on that same diagonal. When we get to the next big change in space as a design element in this image, there's a real strong implication of line and energy, this wedge that pushes in the other way, and I think that's very, very powerful in terms of just simple zigzagging through the image. There's also a real strong unifying effect based on line and the implication of shape based on line in the image, and we're already seeing that. This wedge shape is happening over and over and over again in all kinds of ways in the image. That's really beautiful to me. Knowing that Jose likes really simple images, my take on this image would be to simplify it even further. The space that is represented by the dune is so simple that any change in the texture, pattern, or value here creates an enormous amount of emphasis. So even really small subjects, whatever these ideas are, little areas that are very dark on the dune, they really draw my eye. And I feel like if I get rid of those, that it's not only going to simplify the image, it's going to help to make what for me now are main ideas, these grasses, have even more weight. It's also going to do something I think is really powerful. It's going to emphasize the fact that one of these grasses has a little ridge of sand behind it and the other doesn't. I think that's just going to be a very elegant, very simple, very powerful part of the story of this image. The sky is already really sort of soft, but I could see softening this even more to simplify. So in a rough way, just using healing very quick, get rid of a lot of those other areas of high contrast. I'm going to do before and after again. You can see how you feel about the grasses as subjects in this image. And then just using a motion blur and applying this very quickly, I soften the sky even more. So far, here's where we started. Here's where we have ended up. I then just darkened and added a little contrast. I wanted to share just a quick sort of keyboard shortcut here that could be really helpful. It took all these layers and put them onto one layer. I do that a lot when I'm working in Photoshop. And that shortcut on a Mac is Command Option Shift E. Command Option Shift E. On a PC, Control Alt Shift E. Just wanted to mention that. Let's talk about the square for just a second. When it comes to square and what I think about it, I immediately realize or remind myself that the square is a symmetrical framing device. All the sides are the same length and all the sides are the same distance from each other. And so I think because of that, the square supports simple shooting if you just want to center a main subject. Putting the subject right in the middle is congruent with the framing device itself. I also think the square can just help you overall get away from thinking about where you're putting subjects. You don't have the kind of leveraging potential on either the x-axis or y-axis that you have with rectangular framing. You can't take a really small idea, put it way out on one side, and then play it off of everything else in an exciting leverage kind of way. It's just very, very difficult, much more difficult for subjects inside of a square to leverage or pull on each other like they do in rectangles. And because of that, I think square is a great choice. If you do want to shoot really simple, and if you do want to shoot in more of a documentary way, the other cool thing about square is that it's becoming extraordinary because it's not a standard format anymore. 35mm digital was a medium format killer. That's still true in most respects. The square was a native format and medium format that was really popular for a long time, and that's kind of gone away. So the square has become extraordinary. And then another thing I love about squares, I think square is a great choice for cropping, shooting, framing if you want to move towards the idea of presenting multiple images on one canvas, particularly if you want to do a diptych, 2 images on one canvas, or triptych, 3 images on one canvas, because the square that initially was so stabilizing and unifying now can start to add up to something that becomes dynamic in a classical way. On a diptych, if you put the two squares close to each other, that's going to be very close to a 2-to-1 representation, which is a classic panoramic format. And if you go to a triptych and keep the squares close to each other, then you would be going close to a feeling of 3-to-1, which is classical. And so here's just a real rough triptych, taking this image and blurring it and flipping it, and then putting it over here on the far right in this progression or sequence, the image as we just processed it. I want to say a huge thank you to Jose for sharing a really elegant, simple, beautiful black and white landscape of a beach with us on the Daily Critique. I want to say a big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on The Mindful Eye.